to you, sir.
It's a great pleasure to be out here on a Sunday morning talking to these three wonderful writers. And the subject of the session is vagabonds, but I thought it'll be more interesting to talk about your own experiences traveling and how those have fed into your books and the sort of cultural experiences and how those experiences open us to a deeper understanding of ourselves, how through the process of traveling often we transform, we fall in love, our own sense of selves expand. And to start us off, I thought we'd just get a taste of each of your books to set the stage for this session. Can I ask Per to start and read a short section from your book? It's the amazing story of a man who cycled from India to Europe for love. And it's a real story.
Yes, and it's written in a very realistic way. I mean, it's a kind of reportage, or you can say a true story novel. But I started and ended the book with a tone which is a little bit more like a fairy tale. So it starts like this, from the beginning. Ever since the day I was born in a village in the Indian jungle, my life course has been steered by a prophecy. It was winter and almost time for the New Year celebrities, which remained a tradition even though the British who had introduced them to our country had left 2 years earlier. It rarely rained in December, but that year the northeastern monsoon lingered on the Orissa coast. Eventually the rain subsided, but the forest slopes on either side of the river remained hidden in the dark clouds that dosed the landscape in twilight, even though it was morning. Suddenly the sun cut through the darkness. And there I was, laid in a basket inside one of the village huts, destined to be a protagonist of our story, although I did not yet have a name. My family gathered around, marveling at me, fresh to the word. The village astrologer was also present, proclaiming that I had been born under the sign of Capricorn, on the very same day as the Christian prophet. "Look," cried one of my brothers. "What?" "There, above the baby." Everyone looked up and saw a rainbow that had formed in the beam of light that fell through the little window. The astrologer knew what it meant. He will work with color when he grows up. Yes, indeed, I was no ordinary baby. The astrologer returned to tell my fortune. He took a sharpened stick and scratched my future on a palm leaf. He will marry a girl from far, far away, from outside the village, the district, the province, the state, and even the country, he said. He began. You needn't go looking for her. She will come to you, he whispered to me alone, looking straight into my eyes. At first, my father could not make out the rest of the words. Two astrologers held an oil lamp underneath a candlestick smeared with butter and let the soot that formed fall into the grooves scratched in the porous leaf. The text appeared before my parents' eyes. He did not need to read it out loud. My father could see the curly Oriya script for himself and read it to my mother. His future wife will be musical, own a jungle, and be born under the sign of Taurus. That's how it starts.
Thank you so much for that, Per. That's a real setting for an epic story with a prophecy right in the beginning there. Cecile, can you hold up the cover of your book so that everyone gets a sense of that? Come on, Cecile, just do it. So that's the cover of Cecile's book, The French Encounter, and it's a racy, exciting, romantic read. Can you tell us a little bit about it and read a section from it? Yes.
Before I start, I have to tell you, because I'm reading it somewhere at the back, so I need to tell you a little bit about the story before I read. This is a very provocative romance between a French man and an Indian woman. And basically, it's been taken from my life story with a French man. But not everything, just the base. The base is my life story, but all the hot scenes didn't really happen. And the scene that I'm going to read is actually the guy, JLC, is Jean Leclerc. He comes to India to build this glass float, and he's actually in a very bad divorce. And he comes to India actually to escape from all that, so he's not interested in getting into another relationship because he's just separated from his wife. And when he comes to India, he meets this Indian woman at a party, because at that moment, even me too, I was working at the French consulate, the honorary consulate of France, and that's how I took that thing, you know. And she gets invited to this this party, and over there he meets her, and a kind of an attraction is there. But basically, Katrina is on the point of getting married to an Indian man, an arranged marriage, and this is her last, you know, enjoyment. And she says, okay, let me go and let my hair down and enjoy myself, because after that I'll be married to the stranger that I don't know, so at least let me know what love is all about. So she goes and, you know, she gets involved with this French man, and she doesn't really know everything about him, because she thinks that it is just going to be, you know, a little enjoyment, and then she gets married. But what happens is the relationship gets very strong, and then slowly she's discovering things about him. Now she knows that the guy has been married before, but the scene I'm going to read is towards the end, where she's discovering other things about him. Okay, so this is a scene where he comes to her office, and they're kind of having a conversation. Okay. Katrina shook her head, too surprised at this new turn of events. I can't accept a gift of that value, Jean, I'm sorry. He said nothing, but sulked very sweetly, the golden gaze refusing to see reason. I know the price of land on East Coast Road, Jean. You're being very extravagant for a woman. Yes, Katrina, I love you. I want his discussions had to halt because Jean wanted to kiss her too, and it was a few minutes later that the conversation resumed. My heart would break to see you go. And marriage can stop me? His voice was gruff. He was being honest once again, Katrina thought. Marriage had not stopped Jean from walking away from Maya. So why should it stop Jean if he wanted out with Katrina? But at least it would be a committed relationship in the eyes of family and society. Jean lifted her chin and stared into her doubtful eyes. I love you, Kat. There was a deep emotional catch to his voice. For me, that is a declaration more valuable than a piece of paper. What I give in a relationship is 100% fidelity, be it in marriage or a live-in relationship. You can ask my women, my wives. Even in Katrina's state of euphoria, she was struck by the plural gender. Her eyebrows met in confusion as she climbed out of Jean's lap and strode to the door where she turned the key. It could be a simple grammatical error, she told herself. But even so, Katrina realized that she didn't know much about Jean except what he wanted her to know. She hadn't asked before because she didn't see it necessary, considering their relationship was temporary. But now she wanted to know everything. Wives, she asked calmly as she settled into the chair, pretending she didn't see that lazy smile playing on his lips. He didn't seem one bit disturbed as he draped his muscled frame very decoratively on the wooden siege. Yeah, 3. 3! Her mouth fell open. Was Jean trying to break some kind of record? She watched, transfixed, as those sensual lips curved into a smile. He was not the least bit apologetic. But then why should he be? He could well afford to maintain all 3 in luxury. I thought it was just Maya. If you want the specifics, 2 wives, 1 concubine. Maya was the 3rd in row. Katrina stared at Jean, speechless. She tried to formulate words, no sound emerged. She was trembling as she croaked out a question that she should have asked long before she fell into his bed like a hussy. Do you have children? God help her if he said a dozen from each. He looked quite capable, all virile and confident, plenty of sperm to distribute, the global child producer. 2 from my first. Katharina swerved, reached out for the coke and gulped a mouthful in haste. Bubbles spluttered from her nose. It should have been Jean who was jittery, not her. She glared at him and he glared right back, seeming baffled by all the fuss that she was making. Seeing it from Jean's point of view, she kind of understood. It was a common occurrence in his country. Couples married, divorced, remarried, lived together. Your children and my children become our children. But this was not Jean's country, this was Katharina's. Situations like this rarely happened. Poor Jake, he was married for the last 30 years to the same woman. Why didn't you tell me this earlier, Jean? Again came that bewildered look. Hell, it suited him, all sweet and tousled, life mapped out, still chasing after Katharina despite the wives and children. Does that mean you won't live with me now? She would have loved to dump that pizza on his head. The only thing that stopped her was that he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. How can you imagine that I'll want to live with you after this damning profile? She closed her eyes and sighed. Jean might be the richest, sexiest, and the most powerful mogul in the financial world, but it would not tip the scales in favor with her family. Jake had almost landed in the hospital hearing that a Frenchman was married once. Katharina didn't want to feel responsible for his death when he came to know about Jean's wives and children.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cecile. So we've got different cultural cross-connections happening here. Now I'd like to turn to Robert Desai, whose work I've just been sort of indulging myself in over the last couple of years, with last couple of days, with every word so tastefully chosen. So could you read us a little bit, Robert?
Oh, don't ask me to read. Savita. Don't ask me to read just yet. Ask me a question. There's nothing steamy in my book, you see. I don't do steaminess. And I never travel in order to set up house with anybody. Ask me a question.
So just to move on from Cecile's book to you, one of the things that you said in your panel yesterday was travel is an erotic experience.
Travel is erotic, but not necessarily steamy, you see. Erotic for me, it won't be the same for everybody in the audience, I'm sure. And I really don't know quite what the Greeks meant by it, but for me, erotic means a kind of divine madness. That's what it means. It means going out into the storm, half hoping you'll be struck by lightning. That's erotic. It's not the same as sex at all. Sex is actually something very suburban and very nice. I'll tell you who does sex very well, the French painter Bonnard, if you know the paintings of Bonnard, or Vuillard, the intimistes, as the French call these painters. They do domestic sex beautifully. It's not steamy, it's beautiful. It's grounding, it's home. I travel really, I suppose, to leave home, but I do hope to be struck by lightning.
Something else you said, that you cannot travel well unless you have a sense of home.
Do you not agree?
I would like you to break that up a little bit and explain that a bit to us. What do you mean by that?
Well, you see, I get this from Enid Blyton, who is my great teacher in life, apart from, well, I suppose Socrates, one or two others. Enid Blyton made it very clear that unless you basically want to come home for tea, you will not have a good adventure going to the faraway tree and up the faraway tree and into one of the lands at the top of the faraway tree, which is swept away for the day and is then brought back to the top of the faraway tree, and you will scurry down in the tree and hurry home and have tea. You must want to be at home. And all my books are about not being at home and the thrill of not being at home, but gradually, page after page, chapter after chapter, I edge closer to home. My first book, my very first book, starts in Cairo, actually. Bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit, I go home. Home is what is biggest about you. It is your heart. It is your hearth. H-E-A-R-T-H. And if that is a good place, you will travel excitedly. You will not simply wander like a vagabond, which is the title of this session. And I think of the magazine that you work for, but maybe in Sweden it has a different meaning. I mean, in French it's quite a nice word, vagabond, vagabondage. But in English we never say vagabond. I mean, I can't remember ever uttering the word in my house in my life. Vagabond, I would never say that word. It's a beautiful word, but I would never say it.
But you've used it in the Twilight of Love, when you're talking about, you use the French vagabondages.
Pardon?
You use it in the Twilight of Love.
Oh, that's quite possible. I contradict myself all the time. I mean, it's one of the delights of being old. When you're old, you really couldn't care less. You say what you think. And I probably thought vagabond when I was writing Twilight of Love, and now I don't think vagabond. When you're 18, or when you're your age, it's important to be right. When you're my age, being right has no application whatsoever.
I think that's a lesson I'm going to take away from here today. Per, what does this idea of vagabond mean for you? What does this wandering do to you when you're writing, when you're traveling?
Well, for me, from the beginning, my travel was about finding which was very opposite to where I come from. Because I had the feeling when I was a teenager at home that I was a little bit bored, yeah, and I wanted to see something else. So I started to longing already when I was, 12, 13, 14 years old, to go somewhere else. And it has to be very, very different. So Germany was not enough, or even a country in Europe. Maybe when you come to South Europe, it's a little bit more different. So it's, but after a while, I just started to longing to India because I read about India. I heard other travelers have been to India, and India to me was, it was the image of the totally opposite of Sweden, in many ways, you can say. And I was longing for that, really. And I was afraid, of course. When I came to India the first time, I was 21 years old, and I was almost alone. And on the plane, before it landed, I was afraid, of course. I didn't know anything. And in that time, traveling as a young person was without booking anything. It's totally different today. I mean, I didn't have a booked hotel. I didn't have any real plans, no tickets further than to New Delhi. So I was just moving out, asking, where should I go, like that.
And while you were traveling through India, you encountered this very amazing man who is the heart of your story, PK. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about this and this real story?
Yeah, and PK did the opposite journey. He traveled from India to Sweden, and I met him in Sweden 20 years ago, and I realized that his story is in some ways similar to mine, but also very different. And he fell in love with, he comes from Orissa in East India, like I said here in the beginning, in the jungle. He's actually, his mother was tribal, from a tribe, father was untouchable, they were counted as. And he had a very hard time in school, where it was a lot of discrimination. He had to sit outside, actually outside the house, with all the other pupils inside, because he was an untouchable. So, but he got a grant and came to New Delhi, to the art school, the New Delhi School of Arts, College of Arts. And there he met, in the middle of the 1970s, this Swedish girl, and fell in love. And it was a problematic time in India at that time. It was emergency. Some of you may remember. And it was a lot of things going on in the city, especially New Delhi. But she had to go home because her mother told her you must come home and continue your studies. And he was left in India. And she came overland. She was, at that time, traveling to India in the mid-70s for Westerners was like the first choice was going overland. buying a mini Volkswagen bus or going with other people or taking local buses and trains all the way. So Lotta, the Swedish girl, which she eventually met, she came overland, you know, all the way. Istanbul, Iran, Afghanistan, driving on her own. Actually, she took the driving license the day before she left Sweden. And then, I mean, her first journey was through Afghanistan, you can say, almost. But she went home, and PK was left in India, and he felt that if I have to go to Sweden, flying is not an option. It's too expensive. He actually asked for the price for a ticket, and it was just too high. And that time also flying was much, much more expensive than today, relatively. So he bought a bicycle. And he started to pedal and reached Sweden eventually.
Eventually, and it's a really amazing journey. I mean, you should all really go out and buy a copy of this book and read it. But you also had some wonderful pictures of PK.
Yeah,
yes.
we have a slideshow with some pictures, 5 pictures. See if you can show them. And it starts here in 1974 in New Delhi. And he has a grant to study. But the money just disappears in the pockets of some civil servant. So he's actually staying on the streets for a while and starving for a while. And a solution to that is to start to draw people's portrait in Connaught Place. There was a fontaine in the middle of Connaught Place in this time. And all these travelers, they went to India Coffee House, which was where Palika Bazaar is today. And they came there, and also a lot of Indians, of course, to have the portrait drawn. And he had a sign saying 10 rupees, 10 minutes. That's what it took and what it cost. And the next slide, he was actually picked up by the Prime Minister at that time, Indira Gandhi, because he was an untouchable, and he had become famous for a while, actually. He was a celebrity, which was quite absurd. I mean, he was living on the street, he was starving, and he was a celebrity. And if you read the book, you can understand why. I would not take that story now, it's a big story. But anyway, Indira Gandhi picked him up, and he had lunch 3 times with Indira Gandhi. She wanted to know what it was about to be an untouchable. And I guess she was also in a political, difficult situation during the emergency. She wanted the support of the poor people. And the next slide, he also did the drawing of one of the presidents at that time. In 1975, 76 it's now. And the next slide is when he met with Lotta from Sweden and they fell in love. I think this picture is from Lodi Colony, where he stayed for a while. And the last picture, after he has traveled by bike all the way from India to Sweden, and they reunited in Sweden and they married. That's the happy end of it.
Something that I find very affirming in this story, and I find is that your PK starts off, he's not even allowed inside the classroom, he has to study from outside the classroom. But at the end of the story, and it's a heroic journey that he's gone through, he's crossed all our odds and he's crossed continents in the search for love. But when he comes back to his village, so there's a moment there can you tell us about that moment?
Yes, I can. I mean, he went back after a while. First, in the beginning, for many years, he didn't go back because he was so happy. I mean, he called to come to Sweden, he called to come home, because in Sweden, not because of the country, but because of the woman he loved was there. So that was home. But then eventually he went back to India, and when he came back, he was treated as a hero, like you said. And I also went with him once, a hero. Yeah, a hero, really. And I went with him once, and we were in a car coming from Bhubaneswar out to this village. It's called, this small city called Atmalik, which was once a princely state. And we were stopped outside the village. I thought, what is going on? Oh, we have to fix the orchestra. We have to play when you're coming. So we were driving very, very slow, like 2-3 kilometers an hour. And in front of us, there was an orchestra playing for PK coming back, the hero coming back. And that, of course, in his mind, this was absurd in many ways, because some of the girls who now put garlands around his head, their fathers were the priests of the local temple who threw stones at him 30 years earlier. So, but nowadays he's very well regarded in his home village, and people, there was even a neighbor, a Brahmin, who prayed to him to him and his wife.
That
every
is amazing.
evening.
That is really, coming
Yeah.
full circle and changing everything and the transformation that happens. Just to switch tack a little bit, but one of the things that struck me about the strange similarity that strikes me between Per and Cecile is your book is also based on your own experience, your real life experience.
Yeah.
Yeah? Tell us a little bit about that.
Which part?
The outline of it.
I beg your pardon?
The fact your own encounter with your own husband is what
Yeah.
inspired your own writing.
Yes, yes, yeah. Okay, so when I seen my husband, when I seen him for the first time, the thing which attracted me very much to him, in reality, this, as I told you, is not the reality. The real thing is, on the very first day that we met, he was so honest. Because I've been going out a lot with my brethren, and it never worked out for some reason, because they felt that I was too modern for the average Indian. They felt that I was modern, and I didn't suit the needs of them. So at the end of the day, I thought to myself, enough is enough. I'm not going to fall in love again. I'm going to have an arranged marriage, and that's it. Because it's easier that way. With the arranged marriage, your parents arrange everything for you. But when I seen my husband for the first time, what was so amazing is on the very first day, he said, "Now listen, Sherry, this is how it works here, I'd like to get to know you. I'd like to date you. I'd like to go out with you. But I'm telling you in advance, je veux pas me marier deuxième fois. Je veux pas me marier. I don't want to get married because I'm just out of a very serious relationship. But I'd love to get to know you. I'd like to date you. I want to tell you in advance because I know that, Indian girls are very, family-oriented, very serious and all that. So I'm just telling you in advance. So that is I found that was so honest and so attractive about him, laying the cards on the table. So that's where this story premise came. What would happen if an Indian woman falls in love with a French man? And that's how this story emerged. And as we went, there was a lot of difficulty because he came from a completely different background. He was already married, he had children. I mean, these things is not a regular thing in our society. So even though he was, a big catch, not in Indian, so in Indian society is a little more different, So, and it was not as if he wanted to get married and, stuff like that. So it was very difficult because to make my parents understand that I wanted to take this decision and I wanted to risk this relationship because he was not promising marriage, it was just getting to know you. So taking that risk when you're 29 and you know that when you go out with a Westerner, it's seen in a different way. I don't know whether the others would agree with me, but we have this tendency to believe that, they try before they buy. I mean, this is the feeling that, I would never have got a proposal with an Indian simply because he will think that, I went all the way with him, even if it was innocent. So that was a very big risk that I took, and I'm very happy that I took that risk because, we met in '99, and we got married in 2004, and, we are so happy together, and it's so exciting, and I think I made the best decision of my life.
Well, thank you for that, Cecile. That's very hopeful to hear as well. Robert, something that struck me when, also when Cecile was talking is that, and her sense of not fitting into her family and her society, that so many of us who travel and who also write are outsiders of a certain kind. And we don't want to be pinned down to a specific identity. And in one of your books I was reading, I think it was Flaubert you were talking about, and a sense of, how cultural identity, when we pin ourselves down to these flags or these places on a map, this is ridiculous. Can you?
I didn't quite catch all that you said, sorry. Say it again.
The notion of cultural identity and how we often pin ourselves down to one particular cultural identity, but so many of us, we don't actually fall into these, and when we travel, these identities are in flux and change.
Yes, I don't think of myself, pardon me, as being Australian, except in the sense that I have an Australian passport, I suppose. I'm just me. I come from a highly individualistic society, as you do, actually, Per. highly individualistic. India is not highly individualistic, and that's why it's so exciting. But when I travel, I experiment with being all sorts of people. I could be Queen Marie of Romania if I wanted to be. I can be anyone I want. That is the exciting thing about travel for me. I can go to Nepal, I can go to Brazil, I can go to I wouldn't go to North Dakota. I was about to say North Dakota, but obviously I wouldn't go to North Dakota. And I can be absolutely anything if I have the imagination. There's no point in being alive if you do not have imagination and if you don't know how to tell lies. You must learn to lie well and often as a child. Psychiatrists will tell you that if your child is not lying frequently and well by the age of 4, you should have the child seen to by a professional psychiatrist. It is very important to a good life that you learn to distort the truth often. And as writers, I think it's important for us also. If you read my books and think that that is exactly me, and I did things in this order, and that my mother really was born in this year, then you are highly mistaken. I say my mother was born in 44. It's not what I say because I'm lying again, but in 1944 because I need the repetition of the F sound, not because she was born in 1944. We must pattern what we write, because nobody is interested in us. They're interested in themselves and their own poetic, artistic experience. So when I write a book about where I go when I travel, I want you to think, now there's an interesting man to travel with. It would be fun to go along with him and be myself with him. I don't want to tell you real things necessarily, just enough to ground both of us, I suppose. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that Fez is in Tunisia when it's actually in Morocco, obviously. That's ludicrous. I don't want anything to be unbelievable. But I've got off the subject. Do you know what I mean, though?
I know what you mean, but I want you to tell you, I would also request you to tell the audience the story you told me yesterday when you were traveling in Jaisalmer and what happened to you there.
Oh, well, you're being naughty now.
Can't I be? Isn't that the privilege
Do you mean
of the moderator?
All the marriage proposals I got?
Yes.
Yes, I had at least 7 marriage proposals in 3 days in Jaisalmer, all from men who'd read in the paper that you can now get married to the same sex in Australia. And they thought, here's my big chance for a visa to Australia. It's not sexual, of course. It's visa-oriented. I do understand, and I don't take offense. But I didn't take up any of the offers.
When Robert was speaking, that struck me was that how you also in your story, traveling, migration, opens you up to different opportunities and possibilities. It can be deeply liberating. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We travel of many reasons, and I think one reason is to liberate yourself in many ways. I mean, for PK, the protagonist of my story, of course, it was a lot of freeing himself from his background because it was very complicated. So when he came to a new place, like you said, you can become a new person. He didn't really lie, but he didn't have to lie. But he could just, letting something out, He doesn't have to talk about his background. So you can just start from zero. I'm here now. That's what we talk about. And and in my opinion also, traveling is like, you said we are very individualistic people in the West, and that's true, of course. And travel in that sense is also a way of discovering yourself, I think, because when you're traveling, you are watched. Especially if you travel far away to a country where people are looking different and you look different, so you are watched all the time. So people see you and people reflect over things you say. At home, they don't that much. So that's the way I think. Yeah.
But why do we choose India and not say Nigeria? Because we do. We choose India. We choose India. We choose maybe North Africa. We do not choose Nigeria. We do not choose Sierra Leone. Why?
Actually, I started in North Africa, in Egypt, to travel, in Cairo and
Egypt.
so on. Yeah, Egypt, yeah. But then I continued to India. And I guess it's because Well, India, for me, India is, it's in many ways, it's a much easier country to be in. It's an open society. People like to discuss things, to communicate. It's very easy to communicate. In some countries, in some places of the world, I wouldn't say whole countries, but in some places of the world, you can have the feeling that it's difficult to communicate. It could be language problems, of course, and it could also be that people are not that communicative. But in India, I have the feeling all the time that people want to talk to you. And it's a very welcoming feeling, you know. So,
could it be the Indian women also?
Indians are what?
Could it be the Indian women also? Because they're very attractive, supposed to be very beautiful. That's what they tell.
Robert, you were pointing out beautiful Indian women to me yesterday.
Indian women are very beautiful. I mean, because they present themselves so beautifully. In my society, it's not really acceptable now to comment on the fact that women present themselves so attractively. Women in India are very beautiful, very attractive, and the men are stupendous.
I think we should. Wow, okay, that's going to take some time to recover from. But Sissy, you also were talking, told me the other day that in fact encountering French culture and a Frenchman was also deeply liberating for you. It opened you up. It allowed you to try things that you didn't before. To even change the way you thought about things like marriage and family and society.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is when you get into when you are involved with a person who's outside your culture, I find that very liberating simply because every day you're discovering new things about him. It's not the kind of routine, we do things in a certain way and they do things in a certain way. And what I love about the French, Westerners in general, is the way they take care of themselves. I mean, it's not that we don't take care of ourselves in India, but what I learned from them by my travel is that even if a woman is 80 plus, 90 plus, she's still so beautiful, slim, and they take care of themselves. And I kept asking my husband, why is it? Is it the fact that there's, no security in the, in the relationship? I won't say security, because in India what happens is we also have this tendency of, I'm married now. This is like, happily ever after kind of thing, like, whether I bloat or whether I'm slim, he will be there. But abroad, I notice it is not like that. I think the whole time they take care of themselves and they are fit and so independent. I just love that about it. And I think travel, what happens when you travel a lot, I've been very lucky because my husband is posted all over, so I go around with him. What I find is it makes you tolerant. It opens you out, it broadens your horizons. You look at things differently. So that's how travel has enriched my life.
Thank you, Cecile. I also... Per, there's a number of sort of cross-cultural misunderstandings that happen in your book. So is that also something that happens quite frequently in travel, and how do you deal with those situations?
Yes, of course. I mean, the first time I came to Delhi, like I told you yesterday, that in 1983, I was 21 years old, and I didn't know much about, the real life in India. I read, of course, articles about politics and so on, and history a little bit, and I came to Connaught Place, and these white pillars of Connaught Place, and they were all dotted with red dots, And I thought, oh, this is blood. It's blood. It's all over blood. And I was so afraid. And it took me maybe another day to realize that it was not blood, it was palm spit. That was one cultural misunderstanding, you can say. I really got afraid. And and my PK in this story, also when it comes to Sweden, of course he has a lot of cultural misunderstanding, which sometimes could be quite funny. For example, one time he let out some cows from, and the Swedish farm, you don't do that in Sweden. The cows went out to the street, and the farmer was very angry on him. And he didn't really understand. He thought, oh yeah, I did something good here. Yeah. So, and he was also very shocked when he came to Sweden that people were talking about the weather all the time. Because people do that in Sweden. And in, I guess, whole of Europe, because it could be rainy one day and not rainy the other day. So people are talking about weather. And he thought that was a very strange subject. And he said, if you come to my home village in Orissa and talk about the weather, people will think you are a lunatic.
Do you encounter, what are the misunderstandings that you've encountered while traveling?
Quite often they have to do with religion, to be quite honest. I mean, I'm interested in Hinduism, but I travel in Java quite a lot, where 90% of the population is Muslim. And it can be just small things. For example, my partner's mother died, and a close friend in Java said, well, she is at peace now with God. Well, of course, people of my social class in Australia tend not to believe in God or to believe that anyone is at peace once they've died. And this is pretty much true in Sweden, if I might say so. It's a class thing, of course, but in Tasmania, where I live, over half the population now, in 2018, has no religious belief at all. And so when someone says to me, she is now at peace, I'm not quite sure what to say. I don't know whether to say simply thank you, which is, I suppose, the best thing to say, or whether to say, you know, she's not. She's dead as a doornail. It's a problem. And when the muezzin wakes me at 4:30 every morning, as he does in Java, the muezzins in Java are loud and insistent, and they start at 4:30. They wake you, and then they read from the Quran, and then they tell you stories. And it doesn't matter where you are in Java or Sumatra, you can hear them. I don't like it. Should I say so? Well, I do, because I think I at least can say so safely. A lot of my Javanese friends don't like it, even though they are Muslims. They can't say so. Religion is a very awkward area at the moment, but for that reason, I think vivifying. I feel vivified. And in my books, the only one that's really left in the bookshop, the other one is, this one sold out yesterday, but the one that's there is called What Days Are For. And I write about Kali. And I try to write about Kali in a way that shows I'm interested in Kali. I want to know what Indians feel when they believe in Kali. What does someone who believes in Kali feel? What does it feel like to believe in Kali? But I do not believe. And it's this kind of territory I like to negotiate. And that's what I mean, I suppose, by cross-cultural. I will never convert to Hinduism, but I find Hinduism enriching in a way I do not find Catholicism enriching. I find Catholicism deeply deadening. Sorry to all the Catholics in the audience, but I do. Whereas Hinduism is playful and wicked and naughty. Jesus would never have 60,000 virgins waiting for him, the way Krishna might.
I hope that doesn't get us into any trouble. But one thing that I'm also struck by when you're talking is that when we think about travel, when we think about going to another place these days, it's all about the photographs, it's all about the monuments, it's all about that list we have to tick off. But you're talking about something very different.
No, I never go near a monument. Do you go near a monument when you travel?
I'm getting more and more tired of them. Yeah.
Exactly. This is Mahatma Gandhi. Good. I've seen Mahatma Gandhi. I've seen the movie. I've read the book. I mean, I don't need to see a piece of metal. Not really. I lived in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, there are monuments as far as you can see. I loathe monuments. People. You want to meet people, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. They meet. That's, I think, what traveling is all about. I mean, meeting people. And travel writing also nowadays is also about meeting people, I think, to describe meetings with people. I mean, if you look at travel writing 100 years or 150 years ago, it was about describing places, almost, you know, because people they didn't know about the word, so
right.
it was something to do, yeah. I mean, you have to describe how does the desert looks in Tibet and so on, how does an Indian temple look like. Nowadays, people know this because they have watched, media everywhere. And if they don't have it's very easy to find out with just one Google click. So travel writing has to be about meetings because every meeting is unique. Every meeting is unique. In that case, travel writing could be, I mean, you will never be tired of it if it describes your real personal experience, I think.
Samita, I just needed to add a point to what Robert said about, he spoke about this thing about being at peace. I have to say this because for me it's very important because I believe that there is, I'm very, I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I'm spiritual. And I have this tendency of reading the Holy Scripture as soon as I get up, reading the Bible and all that. Now it's not just because I write this romance that I don't do the other part of it. It's for me, I feel that it is very important simply because it refreshes you in the morning to take and to read and to give yourself the peace. Because this peace, if you do not have that peace in you, you can be anyone, a big celebrity, but if you do not have inner peace, it will destroy you. And this thing of going life after death, you know, the soul rising, it is such a comforting thing for us because then we are, you know, it also takes us through that stage where we have to go to death, you know, that there is a life after death, you're at peace. So I just wanted to add that one.
Thank you for that. And it also strikes me that, you know, all of you three vagabonds on the panel, we're all restless souls. We're all in our travels seeking for some sort of peace or to discover that peace within ourselves.
No, I don't think so.
You know, you have to remain restless.
No, I'm not looking for peace. I'm going to be dead for about 13 billion years shortly, and I will be completely at peace in the sense of non-existent. So I don't want to be peaceful. I want to be vivified. I want to be intensely alive.
Thank
Please.
you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
I agree.
With that, I think we have about 10 minutes left. And on that vivifying note, I would like to take questions from the audience. I already see one hand up. So can we get a mic over to this lady in the second row on your left?
Thank you. Hello? No, it's on. Yeah. I'm Anna. I'm a Swedish journalist also, and I really like your magazine, Vagabond. It's a very good Swedish travel magazine. The foreign correspondent in Italy for you is a writer who is already writing for the biggest Swedish magazine, Dagens Nyheter. And I'm just wondering, why do you choose to have him as a writer in your travel magazine, rather than having some young, talented journalist? You choose to have this writer who is already established since like 20 years. So that's my question to you.
Your question was why we choose an experienced, a little bit older writer instead of a new one.
Yeah.
Well, difficult to say. It's a very specific question. Of course, I mean, sometimes we choose the young ones, and sometimes in this specific example, we choose this experienced one who lived in Italy for many, many years. So yeah, I would say so.
Thank you. Yes.
My question's for Robert. Again, yesterday in the travel session, you mentioned that you need to find yourself interesting in a place. Could you expand on that idea? Maybe, I wonder if I misheard you, but if you could expand on that idea a little bit and tell us what you meant.
What was the question? I need to...
you said one needs to find oneself interesting in a place.
Now this is a line from André Gide. I'll be very quick. Only take me 30 seconds. André Gide, the French writer who won the Nobel Prize 70 years ago, about whom I've written a book, said, I do not find myself interesting in Rome. Je ne me trouve pas intéressant à Rome. Now, it's a very interesting thing to say. And an American writer on Japan, famous American writer on Japan, said the same thing about Japan. He said, when I'm asked why I love Japan, I say, because I like myself when I'm in Japan. Now, it sounds narcissistic. It's not. It's not a comment on Rome. Rome is clearly interesting. It's not a comment on Japan. Japan is fascinating. It's a comment on what's called in English, the match. Like any marriage, like any book you read, any film you go to see, it is the match. You must find yourself interesting. I find myself interesting in India. Je me trouve intéressant en Inde. I do not find myself interesting in Mongolia. Not at all. Nothing against the Mongolians. I'm sure they're very fine people. But I do not find myself interesting there. In India, as soon as I get off the plane in Calcutta, a city which is squalid, ugly, overcrowded, dirty, I find myself deeply interesting. Pardon? Well, you don't. You can make a terrible mistake. You see, I mean, I've made that mistake by going to Bulgaria.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question, which is about legacy in a sense, and I guess it's to the two of you, because, well, Samhita, you mentioned the fact, you raised the fact that travel for everyone on the panel was liberating experience, moving away from your existing identity to discover new identities. But now with the story about PK and Lotte and now your story, I was very curious about legacy then moving forward, if PK and Lotte have children, what is that legacy? What is that identity? And similarly for you, how would you, if you have children, you know, how do you reach back to your identity in India and your new space? So I'm curious about that.
Okay, actually I've held on to my identity, my Indian identity. I've never wanted to get another identity because I'm quite satisfied. And it's very important for me to, because I live in India 6 months and in France 6 months, so I held to my identity. And as for children, I haven't got children, so that will come after I succeed in that.
Yeah, for PK in this book, I mean, he's becoming, in many ways, Swedish, you can say, in the culture. And his wife, I think that is one, they still married. I can say also, it's 40 years ago since he came, and he's still married, and they have 2 children. And his wife is actually more Indian than him in many ways. Yeah. So they're going, and they crossed each other's paths. You know, he's more Swedish, and she's more Indian. And I think that's also one of the success behind that they stay together for so long time.
I just want to add also, I think that in some ways these stories themselves are legacies, and I think these are important ones, like the story of PK. I mean, and I hope somebody will make it into a film, but I think that isn't these transformative stories themselves can create legacies of their own kind.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about traveling also. I think there are 2 types of travelers. There are one type of traveler who is always asking the question, what can I do here when they come somewhere? And especially today, when people go for surfing, skiing, whatever, climbing, trekking, hiking. And the other kind of traveler is the one who asks, why do you do here? What do you do here? Yeah. What do you think about? You know, what do you work with? You know, what kind of food do you eat, and so on. And I always see myself as the second type because I'm not coming to India for hiking or climbing a mountain or anything like that, but for, you know, meeting with people. That's what fascinates me.
Same with you, Robert, as well, right?
Well, yes, I mean, I have nothing to add really. I mean, you're absolutely right. There are 2 kinds of traveler. But writing is a different matter, I think. When you write, you have to present yourself as a good companion, don't you? For the reader to join with. Yeah.
In that sense, you can say you have an egoistic, I mean, you have to write something. I mean, you have to have the experience, so you have to meet someone, you know. Yeah.
Hi.
Yes.
I'm Jay. I have a request for some practical advice. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Okay. I have a request for some very practical advice. So there's a lot of my friends, including me, we travel. We love traveling. We'll travel casually though. We look for the next long weekend and long for the next vacation coming up. You, both of you, especially Per and Robert, seem to have made a life out of traveling. How do you make the transition? How can an average Joe who has a day-to-day job and aspires to travel next make a life out of traveling?
Well, I think it's well, it's difficult to say. I'm not traveling all the time. Actually, I'm living at home. I have a family at home. I have children, and so I go away for a certain amount of weeks every year, and then I come home all the time. And I think actually the one who just travels all the time, I think that's usually quite sad reasons for that. I think because they don't want to come home. I think. So there are some people who have, I mean, they're stuck out there on the road, so to say. I mean, I met those kind of backpackers. They're stuck. I mean, they're just going around all the time. And to me, these people are quite sad. Yeah, quite sad. Yeah, not so happy. So I think you have to come home all the time. So, but of course, I travel much more extensively than so to say normal people, because I don't go on just 1 weekend or a weekend or a 1 week journey for lying on the beach. I like to travel for a longer time and meet people and go from place to place. That's what, yeah.
Robert?
Well, I have a rich lesbian, and my rich lesbian gives me a trip to India every year. And while I'm here, I sometimes make a side trip to France or Morocco or somewhere else I want to go. So my advice is, get a rich, childless lesbian, of whom you are very fond. We went to school together. We have known each other for 65, it must be, years. We are close friends. I have no money, but I write books. She has plenty of money, but doesn't write books. So, I mean, it works perfectly. It's always a matter, as I said, of the match, you see.
I think you need to introduce me to her.
She'd like you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. It's an open question, but might be more to Cecil. If everyone touched upon the differences between the Westerners and Indians and why they like, especially Cecil saying why they like people here, but about being individualistic in the West and we being more family-oriented and other sort of cultural tradition and all. But I think there are things that you can look up to them and there are things that they would look up to us. But how do you reconcile the very, very fundamental differences? Like, if you're a family kind of person in India, you are a family kind of person. But if you're married, let's say, to a man or a woman, that's just one example, but there are so many other ways. Even while traveling, you see that you both are different, if you have a foreigner boyfriend or a girlfriend. So how do you reconcile that differences to kind of love the man or love the woman for who or she is than his or her background or cultural baggage? If I can put it that way.
Very, very interesting question. But I think in any relationship, that is if you want the relationship to work, that's what I see when I talk with people. I think what is very important is to accept the person the way he is. You don't make him change according to what you want him to be. You accept him with his, with his imperfections. And the only way I feel is you change yourself and automatically he sees you and then, he wants to also compromise and, make it work. That's what I've seen in my relationship with my husband. And what is very important, at least that's what I've seen, is the space. We don't have that, at least what my friends tell me, is that she feels alone because she needs to be assured of his, but what I find with my husband is he needs his space. So, I give him his space and then when we get back together, we are excited about each other. The biggest mistake we make is trying to look up to him to give your needs. I think that is the mistake that we make. We have to accept him with his differences and, enrich yourselves with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Might be Robert can also give his point of view on that.
Actually, we're out of time right now, and Robert has to rush off to the airport to catch a flight, but there are signed copies of his book at the bookshop for those who want to get that, right?
I have signed copies. I can't go and sign now, but there are signed copies if any of you wish to buy any of my books, yes.
Okay, and thank you so much. It's been such a delightful panel and a delightful audience. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this fantastic session we had over here. Authors would be moving to the book signing area. You can continue to have your discussions there. To preserve your experiences of JLF, festival brochure on sale at the info desk. Our music stage today has an interesting lineup. Philip Norman, Scavengers. It opens with a talk by Philip Norman about his experiences interviewing the biggest names in rock and roll, from Beatles to Stones to Clapton.